Good evening. My name is Linda Joyce, and I'm a member of the Board of World Wisdom's Project, and I welcome all of you this evening here to our program. Our theme this year has been experiencing the sacred by sharing wisdom through story, art, and music. And tonight the program's entitled Metaphors, Sources of Limitation or Tools of Liberations. And if you're new to World Wisdom's Project, we invite you to take a handout as you leave. Share your email with us so we can let you know our upcoming activities. And we have a new website that's up and running. And if you Google worldwisdomsproject.org, it should come up. And the website has all kinds of information about World Wisdom, such as our mission, who's on our board, our upcoming events, and it has past events as well. And if you missed our program on November 30th, the chant program, I recommend that. That November 30th event was where 4 different faith traditions, Islamic, Buddhist, Jewish, and Christian, presented a taste of how chant is used in those traditions. So check it out on our website. Little housekeeping activities here. The bathrooms are out the door that you came, to your left, and then to your right on the hallway, men and women's. And the doors are exiting here. We can also exit or enter through the kitchen. And then if you've come to any of our events in the past, the doors on the Stover Street side were locked tonight. If you found that inconvenient, please know we're going to keep those doors locked at night and have everybody come in from the south here. So I think that's all my housekeeping activities. World Wisdoms is an independent 501c nonprofit organization, and we're able to provide these programs and immersive experiences only through your generosity, and we very much appreciate that. Thank you. Now I'd like to introduce Bill Neal, also a member of the board, who will be the moderator for this evening.
Again, thank you for coming tonight. I'm Bill Neal. I've been on the board since 1997. I think only outdone by a couple of people, one being Jim Reid, who's going to be one of the presenters tonight. Just want to talk about the program. So it's Metaphors, Sources of Limitation or Tools of Liberation. And Jim and Maria Cox, and Jim will introduce Maria in a little bit. There's going to be 3 segments to this, and you'll see that in the handouts. So there's part A, B, and C. And the first one will be about 35 minutes, the second 30 minutes, and the last one 30 minutes, okay? So Jim Reid, probably most of you are here because of Jim Reid. He said he was we set up 92 chairs, and Jim said, no, we need more. So I put the word out. So thanks, Jim. So Jim Reid has a master's degree in theology, master's in adult education, master's in social work, licensed clinical social worker, and a master's certificate in neuro-linguistics programming. From May 1971 to May 2012, he served as director of religious education at John the 23rd. From 1991 to the present, he's in private practice as a therapist. So I'd like now to have Jim come forward. He can introduce Maria Cox.
No. Now you can. Okay, good. So I want to introduce Maria because we made this decision after the flyer was constructed, and so we couldn't go back and change. So let me just, I've known the Coxes, Jim and Maria Cox, since 1984, and Jim passed away on the 2nd of April this last spring. And we got together for lunch after that, about 3 or 4 weeks later, and we were chatting about all kinds of things and her process.
I remember nothing of this.
I know, that's right. I told her this story the other day, and she said, I don't remember any. I think you're making this up. So mostly I wanted to listen because she was going through this huge process and continues to do that, of course. And then at the end, she turned to me and said, so what's up with you? What are you thinking about? And I said, I'm thinking a lot about metaphors and the power of metaphors and how interesting they are. And then that generated a conversation which she can't remember. But we continued the conversation in all these intervening months, actually. We've been talking about this. And after the flyer, I was kind of inspired. I was a late comer to this, but I thought would be a lot more fun if I did it with her, and I think you'll have a lot more fun because she's here too. But that'll happen after the flyer. So let me introduce Maria. She's a mother of 3. She's had many careers. She started off in Catholic campus ministry for a few years, and then became a massage therapist. And how long did you do that?
15.
15 years, until her body wouldn't cooperate anymore. And then she became chaplain at the hospice program for 11. And then she spent 4.5 years in McKee Medical as a chaplain in the hospital. And now she's been at PVH for 1.5 years. So she has a lot of wisdom and expertise to bring to this conversation with us tonight. So we're really happy to do this together. Okay, I think that's okay. We're going to get our
I'm supposed to tell you to stand, but you're standing.
I know.
These
There
are
we are.
speakers,
Right.
okay? We're gathered here today, both religious and secular members of our community, with the shared intent to ponder the challenges of our time in the context of sacred beliefs and wisdoms. Let us take a moment of silence to gather ourselves from our busy lives, to celebrate the present moment, and to offer grace, blessing, or energy to our speakers that they may share their wisdom with us. Jim asked me to ask for a special blessing for Father Joseph, the abbot from Snowmass. He's having surgery tomorrow, so let's take a moment. Let us welcome our speakers with an applause. Get them excited.
Thank you. Okay, so you heard the year-long theme is sharing wisdom through music, story, and art. This is a subcategory of the story category, actually. All of you realize that most of the major religious wisdom traditions have scriptures or stories that attempt to capture and pass on the wisdom that's part of that tradition. But we also, everyone in this room and every human being is a storyteller themselves. Because as we go through life, we're constantly creating and recreating a personal narrative out of which we're living, basically, consciously and unconsciously. And that narrative inside of us and the meaning and beliefs around it takes an iconic form in a metaphor. So it gets kind of collapsed and summarized as a metaphor that's inside of us, but we live out of, actually, all the time. And so tonight, we're going to explore that world and the power of those metaphors. That's sort of where our focus is. So I'm going to just jump right into the metaphor thing and have you do a little engagement with it. There are 2, and they're on your sheet. There are 2, I'm going to give you 2 contrasting metaphors. The first metaphor is someone that I've known for about 5 years who shared this with me. And he said, my life for me is an obstacle course. So that's metaphor number 1. Life is an obstacle course. Metaphor number 2 is everything is always working out for me. So those are 2 very, very contrasting metaphors. So what I want you to do for a minute is I want you to take on that as your metaphor, each one of those. So take a minute or 2 and do the first one. If you're living out of the metaphor of life as an obstacle course, just enter into that, kind of try to experience it vicariously. And as you're doing that, I want you to jot down 3 or 4 descriptive words of what is life like when life is an obstacle course. Can you do that for me? It's right on your sheet. There's a space right there on the front, very first page, right there. There's a place that you can just, right next to the metaphors, just jot down, get into it first, and then just jot down some descriptive words of what's life like when life is an obstacle course. Does everyone have copies of this outline? Did you guys in the back get them too? Okay. And if you've gotten 3 or 4 descriptors on that one, then let go of it. This is asking you to change a lot. But now take on my life metaphor. Is everything is always working out for me. So try to have that as your life metaphor. You're going through life and you're just continually moving through life, thinking, believing, expecting life is always working out for me. What's that like? And write the descriptors for that, the way life is for that metaphor. Okay, let's have a few volunteers just share some of the description. So when life is an obstacle course, just shout out some descriptive words. Adventurous? Life is an obstacle course? Okay.
Drudgery.
Sometimes lonely.
Oh, yeah. Lonely? Yes. Yes, you are. Good, thank you. I knew we were going to be a good team. And you write bigger than I do, too.
Drudgery.
Difficult.
Unpredictable, challenge, unknown, fearless,
Changing. Frustration.
Okay, good, that's enough. Good, you guys did well. Okay, let's flip to the other side now. Life is, everything works out for me. Give us some words for that one.
clear passage,
Okay,
energetic,
Adventurous. Blessed. Flexible.
Seeds of potential.
okay.
What were some of those ones I missed?
Grace.
Grace.
Affirming.
You guys are doing great. Good. That's probably enough. Good. There you go. Thank you. Okay. So what I want to do is I want to pick a story out of a real story out of these people's lives to illustrate that you've already identified, but it's kind of this contrasting metaphor thing. So the first one, life is an obstacle course. This is a mid-60s years old guy, retired, working a part-time job, 20 hours a week at a family business, small family business. And he told me this story. He said it was a day in late fall that was kind of a blustery day, and a lot of leaves had blown into the alcove of the entrance to the business. So their leaves had gathered in there, and people had dragged them in on their feet. So the entrance was all cluttered with leaves too. So it's 5 o'clock, he's getting ready to go home. And he looks at this thing, because he's going out that door, and he has this moment of inspiration of, I should stop and clean up this. And then his metaphor kicks in. Life is an obstacle course. And I don't want to know if I have the energy to do this because I don't know what the next obstacle I'll have to deal with is. So the inspiration gets squashed by his metaphor. So he kind of turns away from this opportunity and just goes home. But as he's going home, there's all this self-critical talk coming in. I should have done that. That was why didn't I just take a minute and do? And so now he puts himself in a really, really negative state. And he's taking that home to his wife and his daughter. Okay, so that's the first one. Okay. Second one is a professional woman in her 60s also, who does public workshops all over the country. And she had just completed a workshop on the East Coast. And she and her female ad man, were headed home. They had gone to the airport to catch the plane. And their home was in Texas, and her husband was critically ill. And she was just really excited to get home and see him. Okay. So they get to the airport, and their flight is canceled. So kind of could have been a big negative. And she's sitting there and thinking, well, everything always works out for me, so I'm just really excited to see what the positive thing that's going to come out of this experience is. And they get another plane an hour later, and she and her ad man aboard the plane, and their female flight attendant is better than most professional comedians. She is a kick. And she has them laughing and just having a hilarious time for the 2 or 3 hours. They laugh the whole way home. Best flight that she's ever had. Okay. So those are the two now I'm going to flip it over. So life is an obstacle course guy goes to the airport, his flight is canceled. Okay. And of course it brings up that my life is crap. It's always an obstacle. It's always an obstacle. Nothing ever works out for me. And he gets his plane an hour later. That same flight attendant, who is funny, lighthearted, jovial, a great personality. But if you're in a negative state, that's really irritating, right? Isn't it really irritating? Okay. So, now the 60-year-old woman is working at the store. So she encounters the same leave mess. Okay. And she looks at it. And this thing, life is always working out for me. So life is easy and abundant. I have a lot of help. And I think I'll just take 10 minutes and clean this up. So she does that. And then she pauses for a minute and looks at it and really appreciates it and said, this looks so much better. I feel so much better just looking at this. And then she thinks, and all the customers coming in, they're going to have a much better experience. The guy I work for, I've just given him a nice gift. And so she leaves and goes home on a flow of this positive stuff, stream. Does that make sense to you? Mm-hmm. So that's the way these metaphors work, okay? And how is it that they have that kind of power? That's the other question. And I think one of the most important ways they have this power is there's a tiny cluster of brain cells that's called the reticular activating system. It sits on the back near the brain stem. And its job is to sort reality for us. Its job is to decide what it's going to let into our conscious awareness and what it's going to push into the unconscious. Okay? Our conscious mind, in this room right here, there are literally millions of stimuli that could be coming in all at once. And if that happened, our conscious mind would just explode. We'd be overwhelmed. We'd be mentally ill, basically. Okay? So this is a really important function. And the key element is, how does it get the order of what to let in and what not to let in? Okay. So here I'm going to tell you 2 little stories. One, our son Matthew is here. This goes back to last summer in June. He was on the retreat to the Snowmass Monastery with me. We got there like 2 in the afternoon, and everyone's unloading. We bring our own food and prepare our own food, so we have all this stuff to unload and organize the kitchen and all that. It's in an area probably at least this big, maybe another half bigger. And there's a kitchen there's a dining room, there's a meeting room with a library, there are offices. And we're all kind of milling around, talking and joking and unloading food. And I'm gone. I'm in meeting with someone because I had this meeting set up. And 2 women come into that space where all this kind of noise is going on. And they're looking for the guest master because there's some questions about how to get on a retreat. So Matthew goes to get the guest master, and he pulls them aside. And they're having this conversation. And Matthew's just walking around. And the room is just like this, filled with ambient sound, though. All this noise and stuff. And in the midst of that, Matthew walks close enough by that conversation, and he hears one of those women mention my name. Out of all those noise, all that sound, he hears Jim Reid. Because the woman was asking if Jim Reid was still bringing retreat groups up here, I guess. But that's the way the reticular activating system works. There's something about that stands out of everything else. Okay, and the reticular activating system brings that into his conscious awareness. Another common story with this is, in 2009, I bought a red RAV4. I had never noticed red RAV4s before. Just cars. I bought a red RAV4. Maria bought one about a month before I did. And now I see them everywhere, right? You all have had that experience? That's the reticular activating system at work. Okay, does that make sense? So that has huge power of sorting reality. And of course our life is really dependent upon the quality of it, the experience of it is really dependent upon what our metaphor tells our reticular activating system to let into our conscious awareness. Okay, make sense? Okay.
Tell about the roof, about Mary Alice.
Well, yeah, Mary Alice. We had a roof. We were going to put a new roof on, and she was a realtor for 18 years, and She knew all about all this stuff. And so we were trying to decide what kind of shingles to get. And we're driving around doing errands and stuff. And she said to me, I sure hope we make this decision about this roof pretty soon, because all I can see right now is roofs. Everywhere I look, I'm looking at roofs. That's the reticular activating system at work also. Yeah, okay. All right, are you ready?
Ready?
All right.
Okay.
Am I in your way? I'm gonna
No,
move-
I don't think so.
Am I in your way? I'm going to move over, I think.
I want to, can you hear me? It feels like it's so far away from my big mouth. Huh? Can you hear me now? Okay. I have a pretty big voice. This part of a poem appeared in the New York Times serendipitously 2 weeks ago. My reticular activating system was looking for images. So if you're a visual person, you can gaze at the words while I read it. You want me to go over here? Go somewhere. And whenever Meg tells me to do something, I do it. If you would rather close your eyes, and if you're more auditory, and let the words wash over you. This is whoops, I have the wrong piece of paper. This is a fragment of a poem by Richard Wilbur. Try to remember this. What you project is what you will perceive. What you perceive with any passion, be it love or terror, may take on whims and powers of its own. Try to remember this. What you project is what you will perceive. What you perceive with any passion, be it love or terror, may take on whims and powers of its own. It's the two stories you just told.
Mm-hmm.
I want to situate the metaphors I'm going to share with you into the matrix of how they were born. They were not born in a vacuum. They were born in my connections with so many of you. They were born in the matrix of my soul pod, as Jim used to call us, my family, Maddie's here, and many of you who have soul walked with me and with us for many, many years, but especially in the last year. So I wonder if someone would ever do a research project. The richer the soul pod, the better the metaphor, because I think that's what happened to me. Mm-hmm. About 10 months ago, Jim died, and I became a widow. And Kathy Walter, notwithstanding, because she is the sassiest widow any of us knows. Do you know Kathy Walter? Okay, then you know what I'm talking about. This is the image that occurred to me of widow. This is the 1800s, those old dagger-type sepia, black and white, serious photographs. And here I was at age 59, and I was becoming a widow. Just saying the word kind of freaked me out. And then this gal, when you look at her eyes, now one of my colleagues, Rick, is here tonight, another chaplain. We work with people every day who are dying or who have died. And to me, this lady looked like she was dying. And perhaps she was, because that's what grief can feel like, those of you who have had acute grief. When part of you has died, it can feel like you yourself or I myself was dying. But when I look in her eyes, I thought, oh my God, she's going to die. And then this poor woman, just try sitting like this. Everyone together now, just It just doesn't feel that good, does it? And that was pretty much my image of widow. And even this lovely woman, Google called this the modern widow. Whoops. Oh, this is the widow's mite. I forgot about this one. So not only was I going to be really sad, I was going to be poor. Because, right, and that's one of the only widows that there's a story about in the Christian scripture. Okay, here she is, the modern widow. And she has a little more going on, but she has her veil, and many of us, I have in my mind that iconic veil of Jackie Kennedy, the black hat and the very thick veil, which is fabulous when you're grieving, to cocoon. Actually, my massage therapist kept counseling me to go ahead and cocoon in the darkness so that whatever could be born would. But I bet you could explain to us what's happening when she's looking down. She's in the past.
Yeah,
Yeah, so
and feelings.
Feelings and the past. Because so much of this is a blur, I wish I could remember exactly when the new metaphor came. I think it was in a phone call to my chaplain, Brenda, where it became clear that one letter was going to be added to the word widow, and that I couldn't find a way to inhabit widow, but suddenly with the letter N, I knew I could become a window. And so I began my journey of windowhood. Here I was, safe and sound, indoors, but my window was exposed to all this grandeur. And I had a four-legged in my arms, too. Expansive windows even felt okay. Here I could open the window. I could open the window to whatever I chose, or whatever was chosen by my soul pod and my divine friends on the other side. Here I could be at the window, but also in my bed, which was like my safe ship that I could go inside of and batten down the hatches. But those drapes look very, very good. They look like room darkening drapes. And Cindy actually reminded me this summer that at any time I wanted to, I could close the window. I could shutter the window. Don't those shutters look very, very secure and strong? And you see that in the hurricane regions when they're preparing for the storm, and they put very secure shutters over the windows. And I felt like I too could do that. There could be flowers. When I was a widow, there were a lot of flowers around me, especially in those weeks around the funeral, which I loved. But once the flowers had died, I didn't really feel like many flowers as a widow. But as a window, with a window box, I did. And how about some color? I've always been a rather colorful person. And so widow didn't leave a lot of room for color. And I haven't even talked about black widow spiders, which is another image that came to me. I couldn't even bear to put it in the slideshow. It was so discouraging. But once I started thinking about windows in color, then I thought perhaps even as the future I wanted and Jim and I planned was gone, it seemed to me that if there could be color, then perhaps there could be a future. Mm-hmm. I didn't know what it was going to be, but somehow color made it feel like it could be. And maybe there would still be some color inside of me. Okay, so turns out, and I forgot this too, that's one of the hallmarks of grief, am I right? That you can't remember anything? So this is the window at St. John's University, Collegeville, Minnesota. I wrote a paper about this window. This window is the Holy Spirit. So I found myself sitting in those hexagon little hives of this window and becoming a part of the Holy Spirit and asking the Holy Spirit to become me in my windowhood. I should have called you and gotten a better picture, David. It's very small, but it's the stained glass window in the chapel at the monastery at Snowmass, Colorado. We call her Our Lady of the Ruby Slippers. She has red shoes on. Many of us have never seen another image of Mother Mary with red shoes. And one of our group ended up contacting the artist to talk about that with her. Why did she have ruby slippers? Mm-hmm. And maybe if you were there in June, maybe you noticed, or maybe you didn't, I hope you didn't, because it might have been distracting. When we would be in morning mass, and I would be sitting there, the morning sun would be coming through her, and I would move my head around. I probably looked a little goofy. I would move my head around so that the beams would change color. And somehow the colors of her could come in through my eyes and go all the way into my brain. And then my brain would become her. And then I could also go and be held by her in her arms with Jesus. And then when we would stand around the table for communion, I would do the same thing. I'd keep moving my head. So yellow, red, blue, all the colors could go inside of me. Okay, really? This is the prayer hall at the retreat house at Snowmass. In this prayer hall, we have laughed and we have cried and we've done Tai Chi and we've sung and we've danced and we've done yoga and we've been utterly still and we've lit our incense. And to be that window reflecting on one side the sacred mountain, Sopris, and on the other side all of us, well, that was a window that I wanted to be. And of course, I don't know if this is Bernard. I want it to be Bernard. This is one of the hermitages at the monastery. I could be a window in a hermitage. I could be a hermit window with all of that grandeur around me. I got so excited about this metaphor that I called this company and asked them to come and wash my windows. And I'm sure that these guys, they kept looking at me as I was walking around taking pictures of them. But I just got so excited about the idea, and this is about 9 months in, that I was going to invite a bath or a baptism of myself, of my windowhood. And so look, he climbed all the way up to the top windows. And then this is my favorite picture of the window washers. This is inside the house. He got a ladder and he climbed all the way up into one of my windows. One of my windows that maybe I don't think about very often, but it's always letting in either sunlight or starlight or moonlight or snowlight or rainlight. And he went up there and cleaned. And I remember, these guys probably thought I was a nut job. We live really close to Mountain Crest, which is handy in case I have to make a quick visit. And I bet these guys were thinking, wow, she's really up to something. But I just loved watching them. And they actually, probably because I was there watching them, they worked in silence. Maybe if the owner isn't home, they turn on music or something. But they worked in total silence. And it almost felt like we were in some kind of a sanctuary as my windows were cleansed and baptized. So that was, and I am still in my windowhood, of course. I don't know, I have to ask my widower and widower. That's even weirder, right, Joe? What do you do with that? Widower. The widows and widowers, I think will always be that. I'm always going to be a window. However, now I feel like the windows are really changing, whereas the earlier image of widow was quite stagnant. Questions, comments?
Yeah.
Yes.
Maybe a widower is somebody who makes of themselves a window.
A widower is someone who makes of themselves a window.
That's nice. Yeah.
It sounds like we're starting a poem. Okay, shall I continue?
Yes.
Okay. The next metaphor in this griefy time came very early, and it was, tell me if you're relating to this. Grief coming in waves, cold, cruel, unpredictable. I'm talking about king supers. I'm talking about when you have no thought on your mind except I'm just here to pick up my vegetables. Uncaring, impersonal, no regard for my well-being. Mean. What does that look like? Well, the grievers, and I'm guessing everyone in the room has been a griever. The grievers will know that sometimes it means you spend time on the floor because the waves physically knock you over. And I'm a pretty sturdy person, but I have been knocked over. The waves were so huge that they, to me, threatened to take down my whole life. They threatened to not just wash over me, but crash so hard that there would be destruction that would be permanent. Permanent damage. Pardon me?
Tsunami.
Tsunami! Thank you. I'm going to put that the next time I do this. The other thing about these waves was if I could have had some kind of a soft background for the wave to approach me, but no, the waves were approaching, and what I was being shoved up against was the sharpest bank of rocks that you can imagine. So not only the cold, cruel, wet, overwhelming, but then what you run into. Is anyone relating to this? Okay. It seemed that I could barely recover sometimes from one wave and another one would come. And that was the impersonal part, where you'd say, okay, give me a break. Just can I have a day off from this? And there didn't seem to be any breaks. The other thing was I was never sure which direction the waves were going to come from and which direction they were going to take me. Because as you know, if you've ever been in the ocean, sometimes the wave will come and all of a sudden it takes you back out with it. And there you are in the middle of nowhere with nothing to hold on to. Well, you can imagine I wasn't getting too far. I was really struggling, and I felt like the meanness and impersonalness of it was the hardest part. And so, because we'd been talking about metaphors, I consciously started longing for something better, because this was doing me in. And I had some grief buddies on the journey to be able to share with. And certainly, the metaphor didn't change how much grief hurt, but it gave me a different way to approach it. So I'm going to do that quote. Who knows who said this first? When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. Let's say it together. When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. Okay? So that's what I was looking for. And here's what happened. And again, organically this came up. I didn't read about it in a book, or it just came up. Grief as a beloved teacher, with only healing and a beautiful future in mind for me, the teacher employs love and wisdom for my growth. Now, I'm talking about the kind of teacher, see if you can go back and back and back, the kind of teacher that was not the easy A, the kind of teacher that you were willing, and I was willing, I know in some of these examples, to stay up all night, for nights, working on projects and papers. I was so enamored of my teachers that I would do anything to be able to receive the wisdom and grow the wisdom that I thought might be possible with them. My first and primary teacher of pastoral care, Tim Power, may he be joyful in heaven tonight. And I want to say the summer of 16 was not good for a lot of us who lost a lot of teachers. Timothy was an amazing storyteller, priest, very famous. And if there's any pastoral care that I'm able to do with any grace today, it's because of Timothy being my teacher. Here he is, about a year before he died, preaching, telling a story at the cathedral in Minneapolis. And Jim and I got to sit with him before he left his body, and he was still telling stories. Here's another one some of you met years ago, Sister Shaun. She was undergrad theology prof, head of the department. I worked harder in that class than any other undergrad class because just being in her presence evoked and helped me imagine for myself all kinds of learning that could happen. How about this guy? This is Theophane, the monk, as he is known, and he was our retreat master in the early years at the monastery. And he would scramble our brains, and he would tell parables and koans, and he was a rascal, and he gave us our sacred name, the Holy Riff Raff. If I have any theological bearing in my work, it's because of Sister Shaun and our beloved Joachim, beloved teacher. How about this teacher? Thank you, teacher. I've worked very hard
Yes.
in my lessons with you. Here's another teacher about death, and who has been actually a teacher with me as I have worked with families who are experiencing suicide. This is my youngest brother, Mike, who took his own life 11 years ago. And in this grief, Mike became a beloved teacher, not in words, but in silence. He had been coming to me over the years. We'd touched base, especially when I had patients and families. But now, he just sat right down and with a presence that I now understand all that he knows, he knew. He knew. Okay, and then Catholicism as a gateway drug to being able to connect with other beings. There is no better gateway drug than Catholicism. How about all my angels? Especially when I'm feeling incredibly vulnerable. Michelle Dupree, a spiritual guide in town, had described for me once a guy who's like this, very, very big. And he came and advised me. And the great rabbi teacher, to be able to put my cheek against his chest and hear his heartbeat, which could instruct me, his lips against my head, his hand. His teachings came without words. His teachings are not easy. Our resident today, Joshua, said, well, the whole reason I'm doing this is because of Jesus. And he goes, have you ever read some of the stuff he said? It's preposterous. And truly. And then he would sit with me. And then this image from Shiloh, Aletheia introduced me to her years ago. Do you remember her at Alethea's wedding?
Yeah. I do.
This image is called Queen of the Cosmos. And down in the corner it says, I have always been with you. And being able to sit as a woman grieving with a woman who has grieved and who has suffered and is radiating to me her depth of wisdom and serenity. So then when I was on the floor experiencing that grief, just as intense as when it was a wave, the way it shifted was my saying, I know you're loving me even now. I know you're not leaving me even now. And when I would call out for help, I had faces to call out to instead of a mean wave.
Thank you. I think I'm still on. I don't know how we want you to do a little work for yourselves, though. So on your sheet, there's a section on the second page. I think it starts on the second page, yes. For you to pick a metaphor in your own life. Maybe it's one that you're really excited about and you want to just dive into something positive. Maybe it's one that's troublesome to you. It's controlling some part of your life where the experience is not very good and you're very satisfying, and you'd like to work on changing it. But I'd like you just to take, and we've written out some just common life metaphors, just to stimulate your thinking. You can look at those for a few moments. And then I want you to write for a few minutes, like 5 minutes or so. And then we'll just have you sit in groups of 3 and just share some of the thought and some of the writing with each other for a few moments. Just pick one metaphor, yeah, that you want to just jot some thoughts down. It's something that you might want to work on more later, perhaps, too. Okay, what we'd like to ask you to do is just pair up with someone next to you and share just some thoughts about what you've written for about 5 minutes. Okay, can you do that?
Yes, you are. Let's hear it. I have lots of those. Yes, you do. Oh, wow.
Hello, you can hear me? We're now in part 2 of the outline. So even the general metaphors that we use about life and relationships and things frequently have a spiritual or sacred dimension to them. And there are also metaphors that we use that are very explicitly spiritual and sacred and dealing with that realm of life that we all experience in some fashion. And when you talk about this particular content area, there's always the question about language, that people have these deep stream of human experiences basically, of depth and meaning and purpose and transcendence and eminence and all kinds of things. But people use different language and have different kinds of experience, and one of the things that this program is really trying to do is be very, very inclusive about all of that dimension of our lives, that we want everyone to be able to have their own experience and use the language that is congruent with that and have a seat at the table here. So in this part of the thing, when we're talking about that, some people use God language, other people use all kinds of other things. So all of that is welcome. We just want you to know that as we look at these metaphors, wherever you are is fine, and whatever way you speak about wherever you are is also fine. Okay. I'm going to tell a couple of little short stories about the transformation of my metaphor for holiness. I was in the seminary for 7 years, grew up in a Catholic school, elementary school anyway, went to the seminary for 7 years, and then worked in the Catholic Church for 42 years. And So a lot of my formation around what it means to be holy happened in a very institutionalized setting. And I've had some experiences where those inherited Catholic cultural holiness metaphors were really kind of shattered. And I want to just talk a little bit about that, just as an example of metaphors and how they can change. So this is the summer of 2004, and I spent a month that summer up in Winter Park, Colorado, doing the master certification in neurolinguistic programming, which is a type of therapy I use a lot in my practice. And the typical training thing with NLP is you have a trainer who comes in and they lecture about something or teach you something. And then they come have one of the trainees come up and they demonstrate what they've just talked to you about. And then you pair up with other trainees and you practice it. And then you give each other feedback and they ask questions and process. So this is probably the first or second day of this month-long training. And I think the topic was something about the power of intention, which is also a way we educate our reticular activating system. The intentions we bring to experiences also are a way of sorting that. And I was paired up with a woman probably in her early 30s. And we got into a conversation because it had to do with like life intention and things like that. And when I asked her about her life intention, she said, I think my life intention is to have as much fun as possible. That was what she said to me. And so the seminarian, whatever inside of me said, didn't say this to her, but was saying it inside of me. That's not substantial enough. That's not serious enough to be a life purpose. How can you have that as your life purpose? So that was all going on inside of me, and I thought, all right, but then she instructed me, and I didn't pair up with her another time during the whole training, but I watched her for 30 days. And when you go through a 30-day training like that, it gets pretty rigorous, and you're kind of worn out and tired because a lot of it is intense inner work you're doing too. And I just watched her, and her presence was a bright light during that very, very difficult training. Okay, does that make sense? And so it was like, oh, pay attention to this. Okay, now fast forward to February 2011, and my wife, Mary Alice, was going through chemotherapy for breast cancer. So we would go down every, every 3 weeks maybe? And she would get an infusion, chemotherapy infusion. And it was a 6-hour process, actually pretty boring, really. And so she had mercy on me at one of those times and said, why don't you take a break and drive down to the seminary where I was a student for those 7 years. It was only a few miles south of where the chemotherapy was being administered. So I said, great. So I got in the car and drove down there, and I got there about noon. And one of the things I was really interested in doing when I got there is they had built another whole wing of the seminary, or they had another seminary actually added, and it had its own special chapel. And I thought, well, it's great that no one's around. They were all in the refectory because it was noon. They were all having lunch. So it was kind of deserted, and I thought, oh, good, I'll just go into this new chapel. And it was probably a little larger than this room in a circular shape. And it was very, very peaceful and really lovely. And so I went in and sat down, and I just wanted to meditate for a little while. And then after doing that, I thought, let me just see how this is. And I looked around, and just to see, the decorations. And on the top wall, at the top of the wall, all around the whole thing, were these pictures, painted pictures, pieces of art. Actually, they were on the wall itself, but they were in like panels all the way around. And they were scenes from the Gospels. And I really started looking to them in great detail. And I went around the whole perimeter, and there was not one smiling face on any of those. Any of those. There was not one smiling face. And I thought, I wonder what this has to do with holiness, And I was formed by that, obviously, too. And so one of the things that happened with the juxtaposition of those two, it kind of exploded sort of the holiness metaphor that I had inherited as a student, a seminary student. And just a pretty institutionalized person, too. That maybe at the heart of holiness is actually fun and joy. Does that make sense? So that's what I want to put out there. It's just, and we'll give you a chance to explore yours too. And I think you have one too.
So I kind of interchange words. So God equals divine equals love. So I might say, love is helping me, or God is helping me, or the divine is helping me. Or I might say, I'm devoted to God, or I'm devoted to love, or I'm devoted to the divine. It's all code words for the same thing. So my metaphor, and this didn't come out of a negative experience like the other metaphors I shared with you. This metaphor came to me this year when I needed it most, and that is that God is a hammock. And this is an homage to Jim, if you were at his funeral, where who gives the sermon at their own funeral except Jim Cox, but he did, and he taught us that symbol. So you can sit sideways in the hammock and, carry on a conversation. And then what you can do is you can lay out. And I actually have this very hammock. This came from the website where you buy it. I have this on my deck. And the hammock has fabric that you can pull and make yourself into a cocoon. Have you ever been to a resort where they have those all lined up and everybody's laying in there? It's really cool. And if you want, you can put one leg out and kind of rock yourself. Or Jim and Mary Cox and I used to do this. One person would get in the hammock and then the other two people would rock the person. That's like the ultimate God experience. And so I was enjoying my hammock on my deck, and then my son Jonah purchased me a hiking hammock that folds up really small, and it has straps, and you throw it in your backpack, and then you can go out in the woods and post up anywhere you want at the end of your hike. I think it should be a snowmass requirement that before we go to the monastery this year, everybody gets one. So what is it about the hammock? Besides Maria Fenty telling me I needed to do more cocooning. In the hammock, even if I sit down to relax, I still have to hold my body up and hold my head up. But in the hammock, when you lay in the hammock, there's nothing to hold on to. And I think I grew up with a lot of images that God was inside of me, the divine was inside of me, and inside of you. But in this metaphor, I'm inside of God. I'm in the hammock. You don't go on a hammock, you go in a hammock. So I started really grooving on this hammock image for God. There I am. So you can bring a lot of things into the hammock. There's my pillow. I've got my novel. I've got my reader. It has a little pouch where you can put your can of seltzer. You really only have to get out to go in and go to the bathroom. This is up at Maryland's where Jonah and I were posting up. And I found that being in God was a new concept for me. And it helped me not just to be in the hammock completely at ease, inside of love, but then the hammock itself, by most usage, is outdoors. So then I was in big God. I was in big God country. Now, Jim and Janelle aren't here tonight, but Jim Cox told me that they have hammocks in their living room. Has anyone been to their, do they? Is that a thing? And so when you go over there, does everyone just get in a hammock? I never go over there because they have cats, but I might make an exception just so I can, for my project here.
They took out the carpet, so now's a good time.
Okay. Well, that is a good time, because then the cat. So there, that being in God, in a God that's very close in and is in contact with basically all of my skin and my bones and my head and my hair. And then that is being situated in being outside. Now, I did go on a hike by myself on this trip up to Maryland's, and I got all the way up. There was no one on the trail, and I thought, I am going to post up, and I'm going to meditate. I'm going to go in the hammock. I'm going to go in God, and I'm going to be in God for about an hour. And then I started thinking, everyone's talking about all the moose up here. And what if the moose thinks I'm a tetherball? Because there's no way you can get out of God quickly. You know, you kind of have to connoiter and get your legs and arms out. But so I didn't post up by myself. I think it's something in the deep woods that you have to have a buddy. You have to have a God buddy. So that's and there's Jonah. We did a hike up at Mount Sanitas up above Boulder. So this first one is my hammock and that's his hammock. So we ate and then we both laid down. And as soon as we laid down, it was so natural that we were in silence. And he gave me the hammock because he knew I was saying that God is a hammock. Mm-hmm. And really for a window like me, that was a very helpful metaphor about God. So I'm going to go ahead and read this poem.
Yes.
Can I?
Mm-hmm.
I'll read it out of the actual book because it's so pretty. And yes, I'll move, Meg. Oops, what did I do? There it is. Okay. Rilke's Book of Hours, Love Poems to God. The hour is, did I lose it? Oh, whoops. I'm not good at multitasking. There we go. The hour is striking so close above me, so clear and sharp that all my senses ring with it. I feel it now. There's a power in me to grasp and give shape to my world. I know that nothing has ever been real without my beholding it. All becoming has needed me. My looking ripens things, and they come toward me to meet me and be met. I know that nothing has ever been real without my beholding it. All becoming has needed me. My looking ripens things, and they come toward me to meet and be met. This is a preview of coming attractions if we do another episode of this in April.
Right.
But the photographer of this picture is in the house tonight.
Okay. Maybe I'll just mention that that on your evaluation that you'll get at the end of this program is an option. If you would like a second go around on this, maybe deeper or more of something or other, you can put that on the last question in your feedback sheet, and then we'll look at that and think about it sometime in the month of April if you're wanting to do that. To keep on schedule, I'm just going to have you take your time and look at that on your sheet, and I think we're in like the third page now. There's the exercise and sharing part. So we invite you to pick some spiritual, religious meaning, purpose, metaphor that you would like to sort of reflect on for a few minutes and write a little bit about. Something that you really like about your metaphors, or something you would like to change about them, some spiritual, religious metaphor or meaning metaphor. And then there's some questions about ways of thinking about, could this get better? How does it impact my experience? That you can just use to kind of stimulate your thinking. We're going to give you another 5 minutes to just write and think, and then 5 minutes to share too. And it's the bottom of part 2, exercise and sharing, and over into the next page. So there's a blank spot there for you to do some some little journaling and writing. So we're right on schedule. We're right on schedule, really. So part 3, we're now at part 3 in the outline. This is about changing metaphors. So we'll take this last section, just do a little bit about that. I'm going to just run through a couple of kind of big ideas about this. So where do you start if you want to, how do you find a metaphor you want to change? And you can usually just find some part of your life that isn't working very well, where what's happening you're not happy with. And if you just sort of reflect on that, there's a metaphor that's guiding your experience in that part of your life. So if you discover what it is, then you can change it. Or you can probably change it without even discovering what the negative one is. You can just start focusing on what you want to have happen. Does that make sense? You want to do that. And that the metaphors, it's kind of a generic term. I know that people get really particular about this narrow thing is a metaphor, and I'm not really worried about that. Metaphor is any kind of summary, iconic summary of an important part or narrative of your life. That you can develop a new, and they can have, like Maria has been talking about, they can be very profoundly visual. They can also be kinesthetic. They can also be auditory. They can be all of those. I'm just tell a quick story of a client I was working with. She, as most clients do, they come in and they tell a long negative narrative because they want you to understand all the pain they're in, which is appropriate. And I always like people to leave feeling somewhat better than when they came. So if they just spend the whole hour telling me all this negative stuff, it's like, well, I don't want to go back to that guy. I don't feel. So toward the end of this meeting, I said to her, what do you want? Well, she told me a couple of things. She gave me metaphor. I asked her, so I said, so this is who she is. I'm locked. I'm closed down, shut down. The other visual metaphor is I'm a little bird in the bottom of a deep hole. Okay, that was who she was. That was her identity. And I said, tell me what you want before you go. And she said, I want to be free. And she was sitting in the chair. She said, I want to be free. And I said, well, show me. And she stood up and she did this. I said, okay. There's a big kinesthetic with that. Maria's been demonstrating kinesthetics all night. You've seen lots of them, right? All of these. Okay, so this is what she did. And then I said to her, tell me, what are the words that go with this? You just feel the feeling of this freedom, and you let that give you the words. Does that make sense? So now she can create her own personal metaphor ritual. So when she feels like she's locked up or a little bird down in a deep hole, if she goes here, stands up and does this and uses the words so that's a kinesthetic, auditory, verbal metaphor. Does that make sense? And she did that, and she came back and she was in a much better place when she came back because she had been using that to change the metaphor she was living of being the little bird down in the deep hole. Is that making sense? So all of us can do that. So you start with something that's a negative, and you tune into what you want, and then you find the expression of that, whether it's verbal or visual. She has some great visuals of the hammock is a great visual too, but profoundly kinesthetic too. Okay. Also, what you want to do with these is make sure they're congruent. You want to have all of the pieces of it going in the same direction. So you can have great visuals, But if inside you're saying really negative things to yourself, it doesn't work so well. But she's kind of demonstrated a very, very congruent thing. You've seen lots of demonstrations of that tonight, okay? So the visual goes with the kinesthetic with the verbal. Is that making sense? So all three of those go together to create a really powerful metaphor, okay? Let's see, do you want to make any comments about, that was the next thing? Okay, all right. I want to do this one, though, with you. So another thing is, most of us have in our history some really powerful experiences that we would like to recover. We've lost them as we've gone through life. And so you can go back and you can re-enter that positive experience and retrieve that and use that as the metaphor. And Maria has actually a great story about that, too. So
Is that the one?
Yeah, where you're no longer the couple, but you're recovering your time when you were single. Do you remember?
Oh, okay.
The financial planner.
I needed some cueing.
Yeah.
I got a lot of psychotherapy from my financial planner. She is so amazing. And I went in there after Jim died to kind of see what was what and where we were headed, where I was headed. And she just started talking and said, "You have been a committee member. You and Jim had a committee. And it was a pretty highly functioning, successful committee. Not all committees are successful. And the two of you did very well. Now Jim has died. You are now the CEO. No more committee, for now. And so I'm going to help you think like a CEO." That was so empowering. You know, instead of, well, now I'm a committee of one, that didn't feel very good. So,
Yeah.
Is that what you wanted me to
That's
say?
the other part, but you recovered your singleness, too.
Oh, yeah, okay, so I didn't write any of this down, so. So I was married for 34 years around that, and it was a really happy, great marriage. Right, Maddie? Because I've got a witness. She's been here for 25 of those years. And so when Jim died, I became single. And I was so puzzled by that because I was used to being married, and I liked being married, actually. And I think this happened, it must have happened late summer, maybe August, when I was hiking, and I was hiking along, and all of a sudden it dawned on me that I was single another time in my life. Before I got married, I was single, but I forgot. And I forgot all the things I did as a single person, the decisions I made. I made some really big-ass decisions when I was single about where I was and what I was doing and who I was doing it with. And it was a pretty wonderful time in my life. And I remember on that hike, I went, oh yeah, I know how to do this. But I'd forgotten.
Yeah.
Is that what you wanted me to say?
Yes, that's exactly it. You're my demonstration. So she recovered a metaphor of being single from an earlier part of her life. Not everyone has that experience to recover, but many of us have positive experiences somewhere in our history that can serve us very, very well now. And it's just a matter of retrieving that and putting it in a metaphor form. Does that make sense? Okay. We also have, there's one kind of criteria that I think if you just use this, it'll really be helpful. And it's written out. Do you feel excited about welcoming into your life the experience the metaphor captures? That's the big criteria you're looking for. Does it capture something you really get excited about experiencing in your life? Okay. There are some simple language patterns that you can also use to create new metaphors. Let me just run through these really quickly. The first one is just starting before you say the metaphor, because here's what happens. If you just latch onto a metaphor and just say, I'm going to go for this, if you're really aggressive about it, you create a lot of resistance to it, because there are other parts of your life that don't think that's such a good idea. Okay? So you have to be a little sneaky about it. So So this purse language pattern, power is in its softness. It creates a soft expectancy. It is not aggressive, and therefore it doesn't trigger a lot of opposition to you having what you're asking for. Does that make sense? So if you look on your sheet, you can just look at this with me. The introductory phrase, which creates the soft expectancy, and you can use other language that does the same thing. Wouldn't it be nice if, and then you just put whatever the metaphor you're trying to grow into after that. So the example would be, wouldn't it be nice if I begin to consistently notice how everything is always working out for me? Make sense? Okay. So a soft expectancy is really helpful. Or I love to imagine how everything is going to always work out for me. Or anything that's soft and kind of engages your imagination in a kind of a softer, more playful way can be really helpful.
Because if you said, everything is always working out for me, a whole bunch of parts of you would say, no, it's not.
Yeah, that's right.
But if you say, wouldn't it be nice if everything was working out for me, then all those parts are like,
get
yeah,
triggered.
that'd be nice.
Yeah. Okay. Then there's a second example language pattern. This is an NLP one. And it's using the word how. Let me explain the structure of this. Built into this language pattern that I'll share with you, you put in what you want to have happen, but you put it in it as an assumption that it's going to happen. So it also lessens the resistance. You're just making the assumption this is going to happen. And the how part of it is how easily or quickly or how frequently or whatever. You can put something there. And it's sort of, well, let me read the example. So how quickly and easily can I learn to consistently notice how everything is always working out for me? So you're not directly saying everything is working out for me. You're just assuming it is. Okay? So you can also use that language pattern. And it also it gets around the oppositional stuff we usually trigger when we're trying to make changes. And both of these patterns give an instruction to the reticular activating system. This is what I want you to start sorting for. These kinds of experiences. Everything's working out for me. That kind of thing. Okay. So we have about 15 minutes. And we want to just open it up for some general conversation now and questions you may have. Or sharing experiences of yours if you want to do that too. Anyone? Did you have, go ahead, Ross.
I was just going to say, along. So for just another term, another phrase that maybe you could use is to say, so for just this moment.
Yeah.
Oh,
That's a good one too.
that feels
for just
good.
now. Yeah.
For just for now.
Yeah.
For just this moment.
Right.
And then put in your metaphor or
Yeah.
something like that.
Mm-hmm.
That's
It's been a
great.
very powerful.
That's a great one. Yeah. Great. Thanks for that. Just for now. Just for this moment. Other questions or observations or?
I wanted to comment that sometimes you can alternate between metaphors as circumstances change. I think my mother was an expert at this. An example is that dietary things, the way the family ate. There were a bunch of foods that my dad didn't care for, and so she never served them, except when he'd go on a fishing trip with his buddies.
Right.
He'd go down the driveway, and we'd make potato salad. And
Yes.
love potato salad for the next week.
Yes.
And,
Exactly.
And so that was a way of keeping everyone happy,
Right.
more or less.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And we move in and out of, we can lose the metaphor and sometimes we have to recover it. There was another story, we didn't know whether we'd have time to share, but this was the summer of 2013. And the Cox family was going to Nepal Their sister-in-law is a Nepalese woman. She wanted to take the Cox family to visit her family. And the preparation for that kind of trip is really tough because you have so many decisions to make. Passports and inoculations and how much stuff you can take so far away. It's big. And I was having lunch with Maria. She was down at McKee, and we were in the courtyard eating our sandwiches or whatever we had brought. And I was asking her how it was going, and it was very clear to me how anxious she was about all these details and managing all this stuff. And you all saw how connected she is to all the spiritual stuff already. Did you see that? She demonstrated that, right? And she had lost track of that metaphor in this time. And I said one thing to her. I said, "Where's all your help?" And it's like all of a sudden the light came on. And talk a little bit about how it changed, because you had all kinds of help on that trip after that, it seemed to me.
Well, we did, and as you know, you get up there in 5 days walking away from anything. There's no electricity, no running water, no doctors, no nurses, and we now know that Jim did have dengue fever up there. So it was pretty frightening. And I found myself, because Jim said, "Where's your help?" I found myself at many touchstones in that trip, happy times as well as difficult, stopping and saying, "What's my next move here?" Just taking that instant. What would be the best thing, especially when he was really sick. And I found myself doing all these chants and prayers, and it was almost like I was channeling the divine to him. And then even innocuous decisions like, should we go to Lumbini or should we go to this other town? And we had very clear guidance, and I think all the kids would say it was extremely clear the whole time we were there.
Yeah.
But I forgot,
Right.
as I so often do.
Yeah. This sort of brings up another thing around the spiritual metaphors. There's a criteria that I use with that for myself is there's solo metaphors of going through life by myself, my own little set of resources, and I'm trying to manage the whole life and world with my little tiny personal set of resources. I don't think that's a spiritual metaphor, because a spiritual metaphor is about accompaniment, which she has demonstrated a lot tonight, right? And accompaniment means there's a lot of openness in the journey. I'm open to all of this other help that's always available to me. I'm tapped into it. And that's part, I think, of a really powerful spiritual metaphor. That if I'm on a journey by myself, I'm really disconnected from all those other resources. So when you look at your spiritual metaphors, check and see, is this a solo metaphor? Is this an accompanied, open system metaphor to the spiritual part of who I am? Does that make sense? Okay. Other questions or observations? Meg?
My observation for myself is that the metaphors evolve, as you've said, but they also then evolve your history. So whatever story I tell myself, and I have been telling myself for 60 plus years,
Yeah.
As the metaphor changes, that story changes. And
Exactly.
it's fascinating to watch because we think we have a history.
Right.
And what we have is a story.
That's right.
So that's, I think,
Yes.
pretty powerful for me.
Right, yeah. Yes, that's exactly the power of the metaphor. They change your narrative, your personal narrative about everything. I mean, whatever the metaphor is representing. And whatever the narrative, it'll change that. That's exactly it.
Jim used to say, it's never too late to have a happy childhood. And I think when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at, yeah,
It's
that's
not true.
no,
Yeah.
it's still
You're not
true.
making up something happy that wasn't.
Correct.
Right. But the emotional tone of that changes, actually.
What did you say, Meg? When the metaphor changes,
The narrative changes.
The history, the story of our history changes.
Yes.
Quite literally.
Because we have a history that's not a full history. And when you tell a negative narrative, what you've done is actually pull out all the negative things. This first guy, he's had a very successful life. If you look at it on paper, because I've heard his story, he's got a couple master's degrees. He's had a successful life in terms professionally. He's made good money. His life has not been a disaster, but he's focused on the difficult parts of it and collapse those into this metaphor. So he's screened out. I kind of remind him regularly that, what about this, and what about this, and what about this, and what about this? Because there's a whole other narrative embedded in his story that is not part of his lived metaphor.
There's strength in overcoming obstacles. Do you think that in part of his narrative, his reality, he was describing how he's overcome obstacles, and so he may be acknowledging that things have been good and he's successful, but he's talking about powering through and overcoming challenges.
Well, I don't think that's the way it's operating in his life, actually. No, but so here's one of the things about this. This is a solo metaphor. This is an example of a solo metaphor. He's on his own, basically, here. There is no positive piece to this. There's no outcome. It's just the next obstacle and the next obstacle.
He's not
and the next
saying,
obstacle.
I overcame that obstacle and this is what, he's not into the payoff. Although someone might say, boy, life is an obstacle course and I'm navigating it and I'm working it and I've got all these maneuvers and all these resources and resilience. That would be a different guy.
Yeah, that would be a different metaphor, too. Yeah. He's always anticipating the next obstacle. And that's why this is also a kind of a contracted metaphor. There are metaphors of expansion and freedom, like the ones Murray has been describing with the window. That's a big expanded metaphor that offers all kinds of things. This is a very, very contracted metaphor. So the fact that when he saw the leaves, he's not free to invest in life. He's always kind of just doing the minimum, because there's always going to be another obstacle, and he wants to have the energy to do the next obstacle. So it's kind of a contracted way of going through life, if that makes sense.
So what I'm hearing is that metaphors can be used in your life as an overarching philosophy almost.
Yes, they are. They can be.
I'm also curious how I've used metaphors sometimes in my life is for a specific problem or ordeal or situation.
Yeah.
Like I'll have a metaphor for the Christmas season to get me through the holiday.
Yes.
Yes.
Or I'm sure a lot of people have heard of the one little word for the year, where you pick a word at the beginning of the year and then you look for ways to live that out. And
Yeah.
I've done that seasonally as well, like
Right.
this spring or this winter. So
Right.
it seems like it can be used in a lot of different ways, like the overarching for your life, but then specific.
Yes. Yeah. I think,
Beautiful.
and the way I think about it, the way I use it myself is, there are some metaphors which are developmental. They cut across everything. For instance, this one is that, because you're always sorting for the positive in this one. So no matter where, this is a general orientation in my life. I'm always anticipating the next positive thing. But you can also narrow it, and that's a great capability, a great habit, metaphor habit to have. But then you may want to hone it down to, I want to really notice the positive things about this part of my life now. So there are general capability metaphors, and then there's specific application metaphors, I think, too, which is what you're describing very well, by the way. Okay. Other comments or questions? Mary? Over here. There.
Meg, this is piggybacking a little bit on what Meg was saying. What she spurred me is thinking about memory. And I've heard somewhere, don't know where, someone will know more here than me, research talking about how unreliable memory is. Hasn't there
that
been
sounds
a lot of
familiar.
research about memory being very
Can't remember.
unreliable, and just wondering how that, where is the RAS in relation to the connection between the RAS, what we filter out and what we remember, memory, and just that idea of our histories, our narratives being very fluid,
Yes.
potentially.
Yes, yes,
Just wondering, thinking about that.
yeah. Go ahead.
I think you can't remember what you haven't seen. And so if you are filtering things with a negative or a positive perspective and automatically deleting what has registered but not been acknowledged,
Yeah.
then it's not part of your story. But
Right.
if you go through transitions and allow yourself to shift the metaphors, those missing pieces emerge.
Yes.
And they do in therapy, they do
Right.
in relationship, they do in great loss.
Nice.
And I think you have an opportunity to recover as you uncover
Yes.
those parts of your life.
Yes, yes, very, very good. Yeah. Did you hear that? Yeah.
Beautiful.
Okay, anything else?
Could someone repeat what she just said?
Why don't you stand up? Stand up. Yes, you did. You did really well.
Remember what you said?
I don't know if I can remember. Not exactly, for sure, but the general idea is that I think that when you live through things with a perspective or a metaphor that's guiding you, you tend to see certain things. And so you can't remember what you didn't see, what you haven't let become conscious, brought it to mind, allowed yourself to integrate. But it has registered, and it is there. And I think memory shifts as you go through changes that allow other things that were registered but not seen to reveal themselves. And so when you have these great losses or you go through transitions and you're looking anew at all the things that brought you there, I think your memory shifts towards things that were there that you hadn't focused on. It's like the light is shown on different parts of the experiences that you had, and then they're available to recast the story. And I think we do that in therapy, therapists, but I think we do that in any major transition in our life, or anytime we lose something that's essential to our
Yeah.
identities.
Yeah. That could be thought as part of the brain plasticity
First of
process.
all, well done.
Yeah. Yeah. Our brains are amazingly plastic, and when we go through major transitions, there is a whole reorganization that happens in our brain, and you're describing it really well.
Yeah, retrieval. Remember. Put it back together.
Together, yes,
Love that.
exactly, yeah. It does, that's really good. Good. That's it. Meditation helps. Okay. Okay. All right, I think we're done for tonight.
Well, I think we should applaud our two speakers for giving us so much wisdom.
Thank you. Thank you.
As well as the audience. Thank you so much for coming.
Can't sneak out without announcements. Wow. Wow, 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 what an evening. Thank you so much, Jim and Maria. And thank you, David, for sharing your beautiful space with First United. So a couple housekeeping things. If you guys are interested in doing this again, like Jim and Maria said, there's a possibility of April.
Be on the evaluation, Mary Ann is going to pass out feedback sheets on tonight. The last question is whether you would like us to come back and do something more in this general area.
So if you are interested and you maybe have some suggestions or questions, we're going to have you email them to us. If you grab a flyer in the back, our address is on here, but it's worldwisdomsproject@gmail.com. So go ahead and email us there. So we have 2 more events this semester. We have a contemplative art workshop on Saturday, February 10th. It's been so popular that it is full. but we are keeping a waiting list. So if you want to register, there will be flyers and registration forms out on the table. And then our last event of this semester will be Jim again and Michael Abdo, right here again on Tuesday, March 6th. The topic is Integrating the Inner Dynamics of East and West, Next Step in Human Evolution. Exploring Ramon Panicar. Flyers again look like this. They're out on the back table. Our new website is up and running, so check us out at worldwisdomsproject.org. You can watch videos. We post the videos after the talks. You can read blogs and get other interesting information. Thanks to Meg Small, we also have a Facebook page. You can check us out on World Wisdoms Project on Facebook. And we are handing out evaluations. We love your feedback and any input you want to give us. If you put your name on the evaluation, we're going to do a drawing. And this time it will be for a gift certificate to the Rainbow. So go ahead and fill those out and give them to Marianne. And last but not least, we'd like to collect the cardboards and the pens. So when you walk out on the table, there's one box for cardboard and one for pens. So thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening.